A grizzly bear, stranded on a rock in the middle of a raging river, is surrounded by nothing but powerful currents and towering cliffs. Fear fills its eyes, and there is nowhere to go. It is a moment of survival against all odds. But what happens next will shatter everything you know about courage and survival. Prepare yourself for a story that will make you question the power of nature and the strength of a creature fighting for its life. Stay tuned, this is a tale you'll never forget. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, hit like, and turn on notifications so you never miss these gripping stories that challenge everything we know about life, survival, and the wild. The river roared like 1,000 lions, its waters crashing against the jagged rocks with relentless power. The sky was dark, and the clouds above seemed to mirror the turmoil below. In the midst of the chaos, perched on a single lonely rock, stood a massive grizzly bear. Its eyes were wide with terror, locked on the swirling waters just inches away from its paws. The bear's large body, normally the picture of strength and power, trembled as the cold mist from the river soaked its fur. Its claws dug into the rock beneath it, trying to steady itself against the ferocious currents that threatened to sweep it away. Each wave that struck the rock sent a spray of water into the air, and the bear flinched at each impact, its muscles taut with fear. How had it ended up here? Once roaming the dense forests of the national park, the bear had been separated from its usual territory when a sudden storm flooded the river. In the chaos of nature, it had run for its life, only to become trapped on this rock with no escape in sight. The roaring water around the bear seemed to mock its helplessness. There was nowhere to climb, the cliffs to its left and right were steep and unscalable. The rushing river blocked any chance of retreat, and the bear had no choice but to remain on its precarious perch, praying that the raging storm would subside. But it wasn't just the water that threatened the grizzly, there were predators too. The floodwaters had displaced not only the bear but also other creatures of the wilderness. The grizzly's keen senses were on high alert, the powerful scent of wolves and smaller scavengers lingered in the air. The bear knew that if it fell into the water, it wouldn't just face the danger of drowning, it would become prey to something even worse. The grizzly's eyes scanned the surrounding wilderness, desperate for any sign of a way out. But all it saw was the violent torrent of water, the crashing waves, and the thick trees lining the far bank of the river. The beast was alone. Its stomach growled with hunger. The bear had been stranded on the rock for hours with no food in sight. The adrenaline and fear were beginning to take a toll, but it couldn't afford to let down its guard. Survival instincts were kicking in, but the reality of the situation was sinking in just as quickly. The bear couldn't stay here forever. It needed to find a way to escape, soon. For hours, the grizzly remained on the rock, staring down into the water, trying to make sense of what to do next. Its muscles ached, but it couldn't afford to rest. Every movement, every decision, was crucial for survival. The bear wasn't used to being so vulnerable. It was the king of the wilderness, a creature that could easily take down its prey and defend its territory with ease. But now, in the face of nature's unyielding power, it was powerless. Time seemed to stretch on forever. The sounds of the river and the storm above were deafening. The bear's fur was soaked, and the cold seeped into its bones, but it didn't dare let go of the rock. Not yet. The water lapped at the edges of the stone, threatening to overtake the bear with every passing second. And then, in a moment of clarity amidst the chaos, the bear made its decision. There was no more time to wait. The storm was raging, but the river was relentless. It could try to make it across, or it could be swept away and drowned in the relentless currents. But it would never know unless it tried. The bear took a deep breath, its muscles tensing as it prepared for the leap. This was no longer just about survival, it was about reclaiming its place in the wild, where it belonged. The grizzly wasn't going to let nature's fury take everything from it. Not today. The bear took a deep, steadying breath, its muscles coiling beneath its thick fur. The wind howled above, sending chills through its bones, and the river's furious current raged below, relentless and unforgiving. Every second felt like an eternity as the grizzly stood perched on that rock, staring down at the swirling waters that beckoned it into the deep abyss. For a moment, it hesitated. The fear of the unknown gripped its chest, clawing at its insides. It had fought through countless challenges in its life, but nothing had ever felt so dangerous, so uncertain. The bear had been the hunter, the protector of its territory, the undisputed king of its domain. But now, it was facing an enemy more powerful than anything it had encountered before, nature itself. The grizzly's sharp eyes darted from the river to the steep cliffs on either side of the rock. There was no way to climb up to safety. The rushing water below threatened to pull it under with each surge, and the sound of the river crashing against the rock seemed to drown out everything else. The grizzly's senses were heightened, but its instincts were telling it to make a move, to act before the storm's fury became too much. The bear had been here long enough to feel the cold seeping into its bones, sapping its strength. It had been hours since it had last eaten. It could hear the faint sound of birds overhead, likely scavengers circling nearby. It had no choice but to act now. With a final glance at the surging water, the grizzly's massive frame tensed, its powerful limbs springing into action. It pushed off the rock with all its strength, its body soaring through the air, its paws reaching out toward the far side of the riverbank. For a brief, fleeting moment, time seemed to stand still as the bear sailed across the chasm of the river, its sharp claws outstretched toward the steep cliffs ahead. But just as quickly as the bear had launched itself, the reality of the situation hit. The water below was still churning, and the bear's momentum was carrying it further than anticipated. It had no control over the direction, and the rocks on the opposite bank seemed so far out of reach. Its heart pounded in its chest as it realized just how high the stakes were. The grizzly's body slammed into the water with a deafening splash. The freezing current pulled at its fur, dragging it downstream. It fought back, instinct taking over as its powerful legs kicked against the water, its claws scraping against rocks and debris as it tried to stabilize itself. The river's current was far stronger than the bear had anticipated. It felt its body being pulled deeper, the cold water filling its nostrils as the powerful current swept it further downstream. For a moment, it couldn't breathe, couldn't see, only the cold, dark water crashing over its face. The grizzly's heart raced. It could feel the weight of the water pressing against it, could feel its strength being drained as the river dragged it under. Its vision blurred as the water rushed into its eyes, but it kept pushing, fighting for control. The river had almost claimed it, but the bear wasn't done yet. With every ounce of its strength, the grizzly clawed its way to the surface, gasping for air. It swam with determination, its powerful limbs cutting through the water. It could hear the roar of the current, could feel the pull of the river, but it refused to let it win. The grizzly's mind was clear now, its instincts sharper than ever. It had one goal: survival. The river was wild, unrelenting, but the grizzly was determined not to be swept away by it. With one final push, the bear made it to a shallow part of the riverbank, its claws sinking into the wet earth as it scrambled towards solid ground. The grizzly collapsed onto the muddy shore, gasping for air, its heart pounding in its chest. Its muscles burned with exhaustion, but it was alive. The storm had passed. The river had tested its strength, but the bear had emerged victorious. It lay there for a moment, catching its breath, the cold air filling its lungs. Then, slowly, the grizzly rose to its feet, its body still trembling from the fight. It looked around, taking in its surroundings. The wilderness was vast and untouched, stretching out before it, and the bear knew it had survived the trial of the river. It had proven its strength, its resilience, and its will to live. With a low, rumbling growl, the grizzly shook off the water, its fur glistening in the pale sunlight. It had made it through the most dangerous moment of its life. It had faced the river and won. But now, with the storm subsiding and the wilderness around it, the bear knew that survival was just the beginning. The grizzly bear stood on the muddy riverbank, its fur heavy with water and its body still aching from the struggle. The river, which had once seemed like an unstoppable force, now appeared calmer in the aftermath of the storm. Its powerful current had lessened, though the water was still high, swirling gently around the rocks and banks. The air was colder now, with the clouds parting to reveal the pale blue sky above. The grizzly stood tall, taking in the surrounding wilderness, the dense forest stretching endlessly before it, a constant reminder of the vastness of the world and the struggle to survive. The bear's breath came out in slow, deep gasps. Its large body was still trembling from the cold, but its determination was unwavering. It had faced the chaos of the river, and now it stood victorious, yet exhausted. For a moment, the bear remained still, its eyes scanning the surroundings, the peaceful silence contrasting sharply with the madness of the storm it had just survived. The grizzly's muscles were sore from fighting against the current, and it felt the weight of its struggle deep within its bones. The river had tested it like nothing before, but the bear had fought through, relying on its natural strength and instincts to survive. It had endured, but now it needed rest. It knew that this moment of stillness was precious, an opportunity to heal and regain strength before the next challenge of the wilderness. Despite the exhaustion, the grizzly's senses remained sharp. It could hear the distant calls of birds, the rustling of trees in the wind, and the faint sound of rushing water from the river. Its keen nose detected the scent of prey nearby, the faint trail of a deer passing through the forest. But the grizzly didn't move. It was too tired to hunt, too drained to chase after its next meal. Instead, it simply sat down in the mud, curling its large paws beneath its body. The bear rested its head on its front legs, taking in the peaceful sounds of nature. For a brief moment, the bear closed its eyes, allowing itself to relax. It felt the warmth of the sun breaking through the clouds, the soft rays warming its soaked fur. The stillness of the moment was rare, a stark contrast to the fierce battle it had fought just moments before. The grizzly's mind wandered, briefly lost in thought. It remembered the forest, the tall trees that stretched toward the sky, the scent of pine and earth filling the air. It had come a long way from the chaos of the river, and now, in this quiet moment, the bear allowed itself to feel something it hadn't in a long time: peace. But the peace was short-lived. The wind began to pick up again, rustling the trees around the bear, a reminder that nature was always changing. The grizzly's ears perked up as it noticed a slight shift in the air. Something was moving through the forest. The bear's eyes snapped open, its senses immediately alert. The peaceful moment was over. The grizzly rose to its feet with a grunt, its paws sinking into the soft earth. It glanced toward the direction of the movement, its body tense and ready. Despite the exhaustion, the bear's instincts were still in control. The wilderness was unpredictable, and the bear had learned long ago that danger could come at any moment, especially when it least expected it. It was always prepared for the next challenge. With a low growl, the bear moved cautiously toward the noise, its large form blending into the forest as it silently made its way through the trees. Every movement was deliberate and calculated, a survival tactic the bear had honed over its years in the wild. It paused for a moment, listening intently, its nostrils flaring to detect any scent in the air. The bear's powerful limbs carried it through the underbrush, the earth beneath its paws soft and yielding. It knew that there were risks in the forest, risks that could come from both prey and predator. The wild was a place where danger and opportunity coexisted, and the bear had learned to adapt to both. As it moved deeper into the forest, the bear's eyes never wavered from the path ahead. It could feel the tension in its body, the readiness for whatever lay beyond the trees. But what it didn't expect was the silence. The deeper it went, the quieter the forest became. The rustling stopped. The birds fell silent. The sense of unease grew, and the bear's instincts began to alert it to something it could not see. And then it happened, a sharp crack echoed through the trees, and the bear turned just in time to see the movement, a flash of dark fur and the shape of something massive charging toward it. The grizzly's heart skipped a beat, its muscles locked with adrenaline. The danger was real. The predator had arrived. The grizzly bear's instincts took over in an instant, its muscles coiled like a spring, and within a heartbeat, it was moving, its powerful legs propelling it forward. The threat had appeared out of nowhere, but the bear was prepared. In the wilderness, danger could strike at any moment, and survival meant responding quickly, without hesitation. The predator, a large, aggressive wolf, charged at the grizzly with surprising speed, its bared teeth glinting in the light, its eyes wild with hunger. The wolf had been stalking the bear from the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike, hoping to catch the grizzly at its weakest. But now, with the bear standing tall and ready, the wolf realized its mistake. The grizzly growled, a deep, guttural sound that reverberated through the forest, its massive form standing firm against the wolf's charge. It wasn't just defending itself, it was protecting its place in the wild. The grizzly's claws were sharp, its teeth powerful, and its determination unmatched. The wolf, undeterred by the bear's growl, lunged again. But the grizzly was quicker. With a swift, calculated swipe of its paw, the bear knocked the wolf to the side. The wolf yelped in surprise, tumbling across the forest floor, its claws scraping at the earth in an attempt to regain balance. The grizzly didn't waste a moment. It lunged forward, towering over the wolf, its heavy paws sending vibrations through the ground as it prepared to defend itself once and for all. The wolf scrambled to its feet, but it was no match for the bear's sheer size and power. It bared its teeth, growling in defiance, but the grizzly was relentless. It stood firm, its massive frame casting a shadow over the wolf. And with a snarl, the bear lunged forward again, this time pinning the wolf beneath it. The bear's claws pressed into the earth, holding the wolf down with a force that left no room for escape. The wolf struggled, its breath coming in quick, desperate gasps, but the bear was in control. The grizzly's eyes locked onto the wolf's, its gaze unwavering, filled with both warning and dominance. The wolf's energy waned, and soon it stopped fighting, lying still beneath the bear's weight. For a moment, everything was silent. The forest had fallen quiet once more. The tension in the air was palpable, and the grizzly stood over the wolf, breathing heavily, its heart racing from the confrontation. The bear was exhausted from its journey, from the fear and strain of the river, but it was not done yet. It would not be defeated, not by this predator or by anything else. The wolf, now subdued, whimpered softly, its eyes wide with fear and pain. It understood the reality of the situation. It had underestimated the bear, and now it was paying the price. The grizzly released its grip on the wolf, allowing it to back away, its head low in submission. The bear didn't move immediately. It stood there for a moment, still keeping a watchful eye on the wolf, ensuring that it posed no further threat. The grizzly was weary, but it had made its point. It had asserted its dominance, reaffirming its place in the harsh wilderness. The wolf, now humbled, slowly backed away and disappeared into the trees, its movements sluggish and defeated. The grizzly watched it go, its chest heaving with each breath, still processing the encounter. It had survived another challenge, but the wilderness had reminded it just how unforgiving and unpredictable life could be. As the wolf disappeared from sight, the grizzly shook its head, trying to shake off the tension. It was a reminder that in the wild, there were always dangers lurking, always threats waiting to challenge the bear. But the grizzly knew one thing for certain: it would face those dangers head-on, just as it had with the river, just as it had with the wolf. The bear turned its attention back to the forest, its gaze steady and alert. The storm had passed. The river had calmed. And the confrontation with the wolf was over. But the wilderness was far from predictable. There was always more to face, more to survive. The bear took a deep breath and moved forward, its legs strong beneath it, its instincts guiding it through the wilderness. It was ready for whatever came next, for it knew that survival wasn't just about strength, it was about the will to keep moving, to keep fighting, and to keep standing tall in the face of everything the wild could throw at it. The grizzly bear moved cautiously through the dense forest, its senses heightened after the encounter with the wolf. The air was thick with the scent of pine and wet earth, the coolness of the wilderness pressing in on it from all sides. The bear's heart was still racing, its body exhausted from the fight, but its instincts kept it alert. It knew the forest wasn't done with it yet. There were more dangers to face, more choices to make, and more risks to take. The bear's mind was clouded with exhaustion, but its body moved instinctively through the underbrush, its paws making soft impressions in the mud and dirt beneath it. The journey had been long, and the river had nearly claimed it. But the bear had survived. For now, it was free, but it couldn't forget that the wilderness was unforgiving. Its fight was far from over. In the distance, the bear caught a familiar scent, the scent of food, of prey. Its stomach growled, a low, rumbling sound that echoed through the stillness of the forest. It had been days since it had last eaten, and the hunger gnawed at its insides. It couldn't ignore it any longer. The grizzly's eyes scanned the forest floor, its sharp senses leading it toward the scent of a nearby elk. The animal had ventured too far from its herd, and the bear's presence hadn't yet been detected. The grizzly's body tensed with anticipation. It had survived the river and the wolf, but now it was faced with a decision. It could take the elk, its hunger urging it to act, but there was a risk. If it attacked, it could alert other predators nearby. The forest was a dangerous place for one as large as the bear. The grizzly knew that food was necessary for its survival, but the wilderness was filled with creatures that could fight back. A wounded animal like the elk might be a good target, but it could also attract other predators, perhaps even another confrontation with wolves or worse. The bear paused, weighing its options. The wilderness had taught it that every decision mattered. A moment of hesitation could mean the difference between life and death. The forest was no place for second-guessing or mistakes. The grizzly's eyes narrowed as it observed the elk from a distance, its thick fur bristling with energy as it prepared to strike. The decision was made. The elk was too vulnerable, too far from its herd. The bear would take it. With a low, rumbling growl, the grizzly crouched down, its body moving fluidly, its powerful muscles coiling like a spring, ready to release. It was fast, faster than most creatures would expect from such a large animal. The grizzly took its first step, then another, each footfall soft and careful as it closed the distance between itself and the unsuspecting prey. The elk's ears twitched, but it didn't notice the bear until it was too late. In one swift, fluid motion, the grizzly launched itself toward the elk, its massive paws striking the ground with incredible force, its claws aiming for the animal's throat. The elk attempted to leap away, but the grizzly was too quick. The struggle was fierce, the elk kicked and thrashed in a desperate attempt to free itself, but the grizzly's power was unmatched. It sank its teeth into the elk's side, holding it down as it continued its attack. The forest seemed to fade away as the sounds of the battle echoed through the trees. The grizzly's grip was firm, its hunger and determination fueling the fight. Within moments, the struggle was over. The grizzly stood over the elk, its chest heaving with exertion, its eyes locked onto the prey beneath it. The bear had won, but at what cost? The fight had been intense, and the bear had expended much of its energy. It had hunted, it had fought, but it had also risked everything in the process. The grizzly took a few steps back, its paws covered in blood, its breathing slow and steady. It could feel the weight of the moment, the victory and the toll it had taken. It had survived again, but it couldn't rest just yet. The wilderness was still a dangerous place, and there was always more to fight for. As the grizzly bent down to feast on the elk, it couldn't help but think of the future. The wilderness was harsh, unforgiving, but it was also the only home the bear had ever known. It would continue to fight for survival, to push forward in the face of danger, knowing that each decision it made could mean life or death. And so, the grizzly ate, its hunger finally being satisfied, but its senses remained sharp. It was a creature of the wild, and it would do whatever it took to survive. The grizzly's hunger was sated, but its body remained on high alert. The forest around it was quiet once more, the only sound being the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. The meal had been necessary, but the grizzly knew that food was only part of the equation for survival in the wild. The wilderness demanded more than just strength and hunger, it demanded vigilance, caution, and an unyielding will to survive. Now satisfied for the moment, the bear stood up and stretched its massive frame. Its fur, matted and damp from the battle with the river, was now slick with blood from the elk. The weight of the hunt hung heavy in the air as the grizzly surveyed the scene. The kill was a victory, but victories in the wilderness were always temporary. The forest was never quiet for long. As the grizzly moved away from the carcass, it felt a sudden twinge of unease. The air around it had changed, something was off. The bear's sharp senses detected a presence nearby, something moving in the shadows of the forest. It paused, ears twitching as it listened. The hairs on the back of its neck stood up. It wasn't alone. The bear's muscles tensed as it prepared for another fight. The scent of the elk's blood had likely drawn other predators, wolves, coyotes. The grizzly didn't know exactly what was out there, but it didn't need to. The air was thick with the scent of other creatures, and the bear's instincts screamed at it to be ready. Moving silently, its massive body slid through the underbrush, eyes scanning the forest. The wind shifted again, and the bear's nostrils flared as it caught the scent of something or someone moving in the trees. It was not the sound of a predator stalking its prey, but something far more dangerous, the sound of a rival grizzly. A competitor. Perhaps even a threat. The grizzly's chest tightened. A fight with another bear could be deadly, especially in this territory where food was scarce. Its territory was everything. It had fought for its space, for its survival, and it was not willing to lose it so easily. Its eyes narrowed as it stepped forward, moving cautiously toward the noise. There, just beyond a cluster of trees, stood another bear, larger, more imposing, with dark, matted fur and eyes that gleamed with the same determination the grizzly knew all too well. The two bears locked eyes, each sizing the other up. A brief, tense moment passed where neither moved, as if both were waiting for the other to make the first move. The grizzly knew that this could be a deadly encounter. In the wild, there were no guarantees, no second chances. Every fight had consequences. The rival grizzly took a step forward, its growl low and menacing. The grizzly, its body still sore from the earlier struggle, held its ground, muscles coiled in preparation for what was coming. It had survived so much already, but now it was facing its greatest test. Could it hold its ground against a bear that was stronger, larger, and perhaps more experienced in territorial battles? With a sudden roar, the rival grizzly charged. The grizzly's heart raced, but its instincts kicked in. It ducked to the side just as the larger bear lunged, its claws swiping through the air. Twisting, the grizzly used its weight and agility to dodge the strike, but the larger bear was relentless. The air filled with the sounds of snapping jaws and the crashing of bodies against trees. The battle was fierce and fast. The grizzly fought with everything it had, using its claws to swipe at its opponent and its teeth to latch onto the larger bear's thick fur. The rival grizzly fought back with sheer strength, trying to overpower the smaller bear with powerful blows. The two were locked in a vicious struggle for dominance, for territory, for survival. The forest around them seemed to fade away as the two bears collided again and again. The grizzly's body was battered and bruised, its breath coming in ragged gasps, but it didn't stop. It couldn't stop. Survival meant fighting, and fighting meant not backing down. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the grizzly found an opening. It shifted its weight, pushing against the larger bear and using its claws to drive it back. The rival grizzly growled, a sound of frustration and rage, but it knew it was losing ground. With one final, desperate swipe, the rival grizzly lunged forward, but the grizzly ducked and drove its shoulder into the larger bear's side, sending it sprawling to the ground. The rival grizzly growled one last time before retreating into the forest, disappearing into the trees. The grizzly stood over its victory, its chest heaving as it caught its breath. The battle was over, but the cost had been high. It had survived, barely, but the struggle had taken its toll, and the wilderness had proven once again that survival was never certain. The grizzly took a moment to recover, its eyes scanning the forest for any signs of further danger. It had won this fight, but the wilderness had already begun to shift, already preparing the next challenge. The grizzly knew it wouldn't stop. Survival meant always being prepared, always fighting for what was its own. The grizzly bear stood tall, its powerful chest rising and falling with every breath, its muscles sore and bruised from the brutal battle. The forest around it was still, save for the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant chirp of birds. The air was cold, and the sunlight was dimming, casting long shadows across the snow-covered ground. The grizzly's victory over the rival bear had come at a cost, but it had won, proving that it had the strength and will to survive. For a moment, the bear simply stood there, taking in the vast wilderness around it. The forest was its home, its domain. It had fought hard to protect it. But the grizzly knew that there was no such thing as an easy life in the wild. Every day was a struggle, a test of strength and endurance, and the bear was ready for whatever came next. It turned toward the forest, its eyes scanning the landscape. The river was no longer a threat, the storm had passed, and the bear had claimed its territory. But the wilderness was ever-changing, and the grizzly knew it would face more challenges, more struggles, and more battles before it could truly find peace. The bear walked steadily through the trees, its large paws leaving deep impressions in the snow behind it. Its movements were slow but purposeful, and each step seemed to carry the weight of the journey it had endured. Its body ached, but it had survived. It had weathered the storm, fought off a rival, and found the strength to keep moving forward. As the grizzly made its way deeper into the forest, it came upon a small clearing. The sky was clearing, and the last rays of sunlight broke through the trees, casting a warm glow over the snow. The bear paused, looking up at the sky for the first time in what felt like an eternity. It allowed itself to relax. The danger was behind it, for now, and the bear could breathe, if only for a moment. But the moment was fleeting. The grizzly knew that it couldn't stop, not now. The wilderness was always in motion, and if it stopped moving, it would become prey to something else. It had to keep going, keep surviving. The bear wasn't just a survivor, it was a part of the wild, and its journey would never truly end. The grizzly took one final look at the clearing, then turned away, heading deeper into the wilderness. The forest was vast, and there were still many miles to go. But the grizzly wasn't afraid. It had fought and won. It had survived, and it would continue to do so. With each step, the bear moved forward, knowing that the next challenge, the next test, was waiting. It wasn't just about survival, it was about the strength to keep going, to face whatever came next, and to keep standing tall in the face of the wilderness. The journey would never end, but that was the way of the wild. And the grizzly, with all its scars, all its struggles, and all its strength, was ready for whatever came next. As the grizzly trudged deeper into the forest, the exhaustion and pain from the battle with the rival bear started to ebb away. The wilderness, although still harsh, seemed a little more welcoming now. The grizzly had survived the storm, the battle, and the river. It had faced the challenges of nature head-on and emerged victorious, not just physically, but mentally stronger and more resilient than ever. Days passed, and the grizzly's wounds healed. The once aching muscles now moved with ease, and the bear regained its strength. The forest around it had begun to show signs of spring. The snow receded, and the first blossoms peeked through the thawing ground. The grizzly found itself in a part of the forest where the prey was plentiful and the food was abundant. The bear no longer felt the weight of constant danger. Its territory was secure, its survival ensured, for now, there was peace in the wilderness, the kind that could only come after hardship and struggle. The grizzly spent its days hunting, roaming through the vast forest, and resting in the warmth of the sun. It had found a new rhythm, a balance between fighting for survival and enjoying the rewards of its hard-won freedom. One morning, the grizzly stood on a high ridge, gazing out over the forest below. The mountains were dusted with snow, the trees thick with fresh leaves, and the river, now calm and steady, wound its way through the land like a silent guardian. The grizzly's heart swelled with pride. It had earned this moment of peace. It had earned its place in this vast, beautiful wilderness. And in that moment, the grizzly understood something profound. It wasn't just the battles that shaped it, but the will to keep moving forward. It had faced the worst and survived. Now, it could rest, knowing that it was not just a survivor but a part of something greater, a living, breathing piece of the wild that would continue to thrive. The grizzly let out a low, contented growl as it looked out over its territory. It had a home. It had a future. It had earned its peace. And with that, the bear turned back into the forest, ready for whatever came next. The journey would never truly end, but for now, it was enough. The grizzly had found its place in the wilderness, a place of strength, survival, and peace. If this story touched your heart, remember, no matter the struggles you face, the power to keep moving forward is within you. If you believe in resilience, survival, and the strength of nature, don't forget to subscribe, leave a like, and share this story with someone who needs a reminder of the power of perseverance. Let's spread the message of hope, strength, and survival in the wild.